Hey everybody, I'm Francesca Maxime and this is Wise Girl, and it is Monday, May 14th, 2018, and I'm here with a very special guest. They're all special, really, to me and to the world because they're amazing teachers. David Nichtern, he is the author of Awakening from the Daydream, and aside from having amazing teachings in it, I'm absolutely in love with this cover. I think that it was quite the coup to have whomever did this, which I'm sure he'll tell us in a minute. David Nichtern, in full disclosure, is my first formal meditation teacher. I was certified as a meditation teacher through David's teachings, and he is a senior teacher in the Shambhala Buddhist lineage of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and Sakyam Mipham Rinpoche, a tradition that combines a contemporary secular approach to meditation with the ancient practices and philosophies of Tibetan Buddhism. And they have a beautiful center here in New York that I was just at last week, actually, and was one of Trungpa Rinpoche's initial American students. I remember hearing that story about meeting and connecting in Boston, I believe it was, back in the day. And David has been a featured writer and regular contributor to the Huffington Post. He works with yoga teacher Cindy Lee. He's also a well-known composer, producer, guitarist, 4-time Emmy winner, and 2-time Grammy nominee. We like to call him Nudgy. David Nichtern, thanks so much for being here today on Wise Girl. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you. Some of those bio points are sort of older than others, but let's just leave it where it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's in the book.
Yeah.
Everything changes, right? Isn't that
everything changes? Yeah.
Everything isn't permanent.
That's what the Wheel of Life is saying. That's for sure.
So, reimagining the Buddha's Wheel of Life. Why don't we start there and then we can work our way back? What is the Wheel of Life? Because you took the time to explain this to everyone very eloquently, and not every Buddhist tradition uses the Wheel of Life in the way that is like front and center, but it can be a really helpful template to understanding all the teaching. So go for it.
Well, so first of all, I call it a PowerPoint presentation from antiquity. It dates all the way back to the time of the Buddha. The original drawings were actually commissioned by a king in India on the advice of the Buddha as a gift to another king. And supposedly when the second king received it and contemplated the imagery in it and understood it, he became enlightened. So this is considered to have a certain potency, the information that's on the wheel. Of course, it's a graphic representation, which is called a tanka in the Tibetan tradition. So you have to really decipher it. That's the key point. And it's very old. So some of the imagery is based on kind of traditional Indian cosmology. And the attempt that I made in the book, pursuant to me working and learning this from my teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, is how could we express it in contemporary terms that would have, real meaning for people now. And in that regard, it can be seen as a sort of psychological portrait of our existence in this world, how we move through the world, how our conditioning creates certain realities for us, how our habits begin to become almost self-fulfilling prophecies. And it's simultaneously a portrait of imprisonment in a certain way and of liberation. In other words, using the same template, you can move through it. So my original idea, which I will work on probably at some point, is to turn into an interactive video game.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the original idea. And you play the Wheel of Life. And the byline was going to be, learn how to win the game you're already playing.
That you're stuck in, right?
Exactly. People talk about virtual reality, but in some sense, from a Buddhist point of view, this already is virtual reality. In the sense that our world appears to be a certain ways, and a lot of that is filtered through our own projections. Everybody knows this kind of logic. And so the Wheel of Life is a really precise portrait of how our mind takes shape, how our world takes shape. And it features kind of 6 realms, which are the main sort of arenas of how we live, how we relate to others, how we create environments for ourselves, how we suffer, how we get attached to different things. So it's quite a powerful diagram once you understand it.
And that's what I really love, is that I think sometimes people get lost when they're, trying to figure out where do we go? This is a map to the world, and I was only looking for a map to the neighborhood. And like, where's my right?
Yes, that's a really good point, because I'm working on another book now, and I'm quoting my Uncle Irv, who was a great musician and a great mentor to me. And Uncle Irv used to say, you can only tell people something if they have a place to put it. And so you have to really be careful as a teacher to understand what the real realm of students' curiosity is and what's going to be helpful to that person. So the Buddhist teachings, as you know, are extremely vast and profound and multifaceted, and they say very much depending on the sort of aptitude and interests of the various students. So this is a very complete thing, the Wheel of Life, but it also can be partitioned off, and you can grab a little bit of something from it that's helpful and useful.
Well, I think that's true of all the Buddhist teachings that I've learned, is you can kind of nibble, you can do the buffet, you can choose the appetizer, but don't mistake the appetizer for the entree, and don't mistake the holiday meal for the snack. People just, they sort of are like, mindfulness, the answer to everything. And it's like, well, that's a foundational piece that's huge and can really show you amazing improvements, like in almost not a lot of time once you hook into it. And then there's this whole other way of being and sort of ethical principles and different kinds of things that actually will help maintain the mindfulness, and everything kind of works together in this wheel, in this larger cosmology that really ends up helping keep you moving toward, you could say enlightenment, or you could just say toward well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mindfulness, I'm glad to hear you say that, is a foundational practice. It is, something you really, if you skip over that into some kind of advanced tantric rituals, and you skip over the basic ability to be present with what you're doing and pay attention in a mindful way, you do so at your own peril. So I'm glad to hear you saying that. I myself have found myself saying that quite a few times. It's like, okay, mindfulness is a foundation. Then, there's a pretty well mapped out succession of practices throughout Buddhism, that each one is intended to be built upon the previous level.
100%. Do you want to give a quick hit of sort of the three groupings of do you want to do that, or?
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's really helpful for people who are just beginning to get into this to understand that that what we're calling mindfulness really has been chipped out of the Buddhist teachings. That's primarily where it comes from. Now, it's not to say that Buddhists own it, because many other traditions get the idea of mindfulness and working with the art of attention, for example. But in general, in Buddhism, we talk about three big vehicles, or yanas, they're called in Sanskrit, of cultivation. And I think that's a really good way to think of practices. You're cultivating something, you're strengthening something, you're building on something. So in the narrow vehicle, the Hinayana, we're really working a lot on kind of creating a mindful and ethical foundation for how to be. And that really comes with the notion of renunciation, that you recognize certain habits and patterns are not helpful. And so that's the ultimate idea.
I'm just laughing because I'm like, you think.
You had a telling look on your face. That's why I laughed so hard.
I'm bursting at the seams to tell you what I told Sharon last week, but I'll wait. Go ahead.
Okay, so the ability to discriminate between activities and modalities that are going to be helpful for you and helpful for others, and ones that'll be injurious to you and injurious to others. That's called prajna, discriminating awareness wisdom. And that's really, you're sharpening that. You're beginning to see without any real, you don't really have to make any big commitment to any kind of church and state. It's really just sharpening your eyes in terms of seeing what's going on. And to do that, the basic practice is to sit and be with yourself finally after trying everything else, and be quiet, And,
It really is the last resort. It's like I checked into every other hotel.
That's right. It is. I believe it is a kind of close to the final stop, because as long as you think there's some out, you'll go for it. But so it's funny because my teacher Thurman, which I used to say, when we talk about hopelessness, we're not talking about a strategy. It's actually hopeless.
It's like I throw out my hands, in 12 step. It's I think it's called like surrender. You're just like, I give up. I need help.
It's surrender is a good idea, and renunciation is the other part of letting it go. So in the Hinayana path, there's a lot of emphasis on what we call individual practice or individual liberation. Really, somebody traditionally would practice either in a cave or a forest hut or by themselves, and really do a lot of meditation practice and kind of see how their mind is working, really, and try to free it up from certain negative patterns. It's pretty. There's nothing really kind of quote unquote religious or maybe even spiritual about it. It's sort of psychology. It's science.
Yeah, it's literally the ability to sit with yourself. I forget who it is that some famous person who was either a philosopher, a psychiatrist, or somebody said, the problem with man is they can't sit in a room alone with themselves for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever. I don't know who it was, somebody famous. But that idea of being able to cultivate that ability to just tolerate your own presence and your full experience, and what I call the garbage dump of the mind, right?
Yeah.
Or what can be, that then when you clear out all the stuff that's been dumped in there, you're like, wow, this is like soil I can cultivate and grow a beautiful garden.
Right. And that actually takes us to the next yana. What you just gave a sort of short summary in a way of the Hinayana or narrow path. The Mahayana is the great vehicle. And what do you want to cultivate in that garden? And in general, we're pulling up the weeds of selfish, self-cherishing, and kind of narcissism, basically, and paranoia and manipulation. And we're planting seeds of compassion and affection and sympathy and empathy for others. And it's kind of quite a, well, you hear what happens when you do that, and the bells go off.
Yeah.
It's quite magnanimous and kind of broader stroke in terms of what life can and should be about. And it really simply is exchanging oneself for others. It's the idea. You feel somewhat more grounded yourself, and you feel like it won't drain you necessarily to be kind and considerate to other people. Might even enhance your own existence. And that's the bigger vehicle, which is really probably the broadest spread aspect of Buddhism. That's in Zen. That's in, many different Buddhist schools have this Mahayana quality in them. And then these are called turnings of the wheel, that the Buddha taught all three of these modalities. And the After Hours Club is called the Vajrayana. And,
I love how you say that, because that's kind of how I feel about it too. I'm like, oh, let's party.
Yeah, well, let's slow it down.
No, meaning let's enjoy life. Like you're integrating these other parts of presence and concentration. They're more integrated so that you're fully present for the range of experience that can also include, I think in some ways, when you're doing a lot of the weeding, this range of, I don't know, like joy, if you will. I don't know.
Okay. It includes...
Let's
say that it includes, you begin to see that the seed of your whole state of being is actually a joyful energy.
Yeah.
As Bob Thurman was saying the other night, blissful. But the trick with the Buddhist thing is that if we become, and this is a big topic in the book, if we look at bliss as something that we can acquire, attain, and sustain, then this becomes yet a finer trap. It's called the golden trap, and it's called the God realms, or the Devalokas.
It's called the golden handcuffs here in the States.
Golden handcuffs. And so instead of seeing bliss as something you can attach to, you see it as something more intrinsic and not really based on any kind of constructed reality at all, So therefore, it's not a product of your effort or your kind of attempt to grasp onto it at all. It's just sort of more natural expression. So the third turning of the wheel the Buddha did is called the Vajrayana, which really is about indestructible aspects of our. Vajra is like a meteoric iron, like cosmic metal, or diamond is sometimes the analogy. It's not really diamond, like it's sort of otherworldly, but it's indestructible in the way a diamond is. In other words, when you look at somebody, you talk about their basic goodness or their fundamental quality of, kind of brilliance of some kind. This is considered not to be a constructed part of their personality or an acquired part, but an actual natural, the same way that a diamond is a natural part. And in a similar way, the diamond when you find it, it can be quite in the rough. And, so the idea of polishing it is maybe more appropriate than creating it. So
yeah, it's part of the essential nature of all beings and then you are working to uncover it, or whatever version that you want to use, take it to the jeweler so they can cut it down and use a teacher in that way, but that you really are the ultimate faceter of that.
Right. So these teachings are interesting in that obviously what you just said is not a big secret, is it? I mean, that's a beautiful, glowing way of describing reality. But the teachings themselves, the methods, are not offered in the public domain. So, and the reason is because they can be easily misappropriated towards kind of, you can see how easy that could turn into a kind of giant ego trip. You know what I mean? I'm perfect the way I am. Everything I do is magic. And instead of polishing a diamond, at that point, you're polishing a turd.
But I do think that there's the misunderstanding that can happen, exactly what you said. But in my personal experience, once I hit onto the nature of what your teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, calls the basic goodness, other folks call Buddha nature or true nature or whatever you want to call it, that when I was made aware of that reality, I'll call it that, truth, I'll call it that truth, that basic sort of universal truth. It then gave me sort of an ability to touch into a ground of being that I wasn't always falling back into this collapse of like, I'm not good enough, I'm terrible, I'm awful, I have to be ashamed, I'm a bad person, I'm whatever. So that then the energy around my activity was about stripping away the conditioning and focused on polishing the diamond and not on trying to make the diamond into titanium or something.
Right.
It wasn't like some misconstrued notion of, what are we doing here? We're taking what's good, realizing what is sort of making it cloudy, and we're just sort of saying chip, 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 chip away. And then that's all those practices and all the time and investment that we do toward seeing things differently, for me, in my experience, and then applying whatever practices you do to help uncover what's there.
In particular, though, the method, the skillful means of that particular set of practices is transmitted from a teacher to a student. Right. One-to-one. Right. So even though it's said to be secret in that way, or, kind of by initiation, it's sometimes called an open secret, or, something hidden in plain sight, which is really what you're talking about. But the method of like working with energy in that way from a fruition point of view is you're saying, hey, it's already manifest. It's already here. It's here right now. There also is a sort of, if we don't go through the preparatory practices of the Hinayana and the Mahayana, there's a chance of misappropriating that teaching to mean, well, I can just do whatever I want and it's cool.
Well, materialism and nihilism, I don't think is anything that the Buddha ever had in mind, although those are like the near enemies, right? When we talk about unconditional love versus attachment, like, do I really want you to love me because I want something from you, or do I really just love you for who you are? And this idea of also having this idea of like, it doesn't matter what I do because I'm perfect. That's not what I don't think anybody ever said in Buddhist tradition, but it is misinterpreted.
Right. So it's, in other words, just there's a certain care given when those teachings are presented. There's a certain kind of authorization seal and things like that, and that's where the notion of lineage comes in very strongly, and appropriate student-teacher relationships and all these kind of things like that are very, very important.
Yes. And we all know that goes out the window sometimes. And unfortunately, there's a lot of folks who have received amazing transmissions and teachings, and then other teachers and students that have, you know, crossed the boundary there that is inappropriate in terms of, well, I'm just talking about, like, we've heard a lot of folks in even recent times, in recent circles, where there have been sexual misconduct with teachers, or, you know, those kinds of things, which are not scaring everyone. I'm saying it's like the rest of the world. There's issues sometimes even within these deepest teachings.
Yeah, and also these are cultural issues, you know, and they're timely issues. And there has never been a presentation of Buddhism in 2018 before this. This is a very unique environment. It's quite a cultural mashup. You know what a mashup is? Music, right?
Oh, please.
You know, you just play two records right on top of each other. So to conjoin Tibetan Buddhism with Western democratic society is a complete mashup, actually.
Yeah.
And a work in progress in terms of how that's going to manifest.
What do you think needs to happen there to maybe uncouple some of those threads, or to see more clearly what they're able to teach one another and what isn't so effective?
Well, in a nutshell, that was going to be the title of my autobiography, My Life in a Nutshell. What do you think?
I like it. Is it an autobiography or is it a memoir?
Well, you know, what's the difference? Is there a difference?
Oh, well, of course.
Okay.
One is how you feel about what's going on and how you remember things to be. And the other one is sort of the explicit factual narrative. And so one has more to do with implicit memory, and the other one has to do with explicit memory. And so again, it's sort of how we relate to the things in our life that happened, as opposed to exactly what happened.
It would be a memoir in that case.
Good. In a nutshell, David Nichtern on your shelves in 2022.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, because I have another book I'm doing now that's in between, which is called Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck. And I just finished the draft of that, and that'll be out in the fall of 2019 on Wisdom Publications. So that's a whole nother topic. Let's finish at least the thread of how these cultures will overlap. And I think the key element is going to be the relationship to leadership and hierarchy, which is, you know, for example, traditional Asian culture is hierarchical. That's what this teachings come from. The relationship between the teacher and student is not a democratic relationship in the higher yanas, in the Vajrayana. In the Hinayana, it is a little more democratic. It's just like you say stuff, the person does it. You know, it's not like, but you know, if you're studying with a martial arts master, for example, this is not a democracy. And the whole idea of the fact that even if you really carefully look, we don't actually even live in a democracy. We live in an autocracy already anyhow, but it's a corrupt one. There's no sort of ethical stepladder that you climb to get to the top of the heap. You just cheat and lie and screw your way to it, you know? So I think we're comparing apples and oranges in a way, but I think how does this all come together is going to be very, very interesting to see. Very interesting to see.
Indeed. And, you know, I remember when I was interviewing Gloria Steinem, she said, we're linked, we're not ranked, you know, and that was sort of that fundamental idea of, like you say, the Mahayana, the community, the sense of interdependence, as they would say, in this co-beingness, right?
Well, see, now I'm going to now out loud wish that Gloria was here now to participate in this conversation, because that to me is the beginning of the conversation. Because how would she address the notion, like, is there any such thing as hierarchy within any kind of organizational structure? Is it just co-equals?
Yes. No, she would. And I think I'm speaking for her, which is completely not okay, but I'm just pretending, right?
Right. Well, how would you say it then?
Well, so my understanding is it goes back to intention. So is the intention of the individual to be subjugative, right? Am I trying to power over, or am I trying to empower with? And so leadership is not exclusive to that, right? You can still be a leader and be working with the collective, right? And so one has to know what the intention is. So is it ego-driven, small sense of self, or is it based on a greater notion of what we're really trying to do here and why?
So if somebody had a greater notion and a greater vision, according to that view, they're going to kind of rise to the top of the decision tree.
Maybe or maybe not. I mean, Bob just said back in, I'm talking about Bob Thurman. David and I were with Mark Epstein and Sharon Salzberg and Bob Thurman this weekend. And Bob just said that, in Tibetan culture, it is very much oriented in a way that he was questioning whether or not it was going to be consumed ultimately by, Chinese culture. And he said, ultimately, I don't think it will be. I think it will, survive. But his point was that because of the orientation being more collective, if you will, as opposed to, whatever, it makes that culture in some ways more vulnerable to that kind of way of thinking, but not necessarily, because his point was that, no, actually, I think that it will survive. I think it will go on.
And the thing that will survive is exactly what? In that discussion,
Buddhism, really. I mean,
but Vajrayana Buddhism.
Well, that's Bob's orientation.
Is that what he thinks will survive?
He didn't say that. Now I'm really putting a lot of people's words into my mouth. I'm afraid that literally, I'm speaking out of different heads at this point.
Okay.
My understanding of what he was trying to say is the orientation around a deeper understanding of interdependence, of connectivity, of not having to be, as therapist Terry Real says, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Do you want to be right or do you want to be married? Do you want to be part of an individual only, or do you want to be part and seen as an integrated tapestry, the web?
Well, I would go as far as to say, if you want to be right, don't get married.
Yeah, I know. I know, but oh my God, we could go into that, but yeah. But there are choice points that we make, and there are things to learn in terms of interrelationality, and I think that this is a relational path.
Yeah, I mean, there's two different threads here that are really both important. One is societal, and one is sort of cultural or metaphysical. And the thing with, I think the thing that we're all going to look at and co-create in a sense going forward, we'll see how this comes out, is the spiritual domain and the temporal domain, in what way are they going to, see, this is really a big topic for Shambhalians, because Shambhala says you can cohabitate the spiritual and temporal domains. That's really the essence of those teachings.
The absolute and the relative.
Yeah, that's included within Tantra altogether, and the absolute and relative are considered inseparable, and the notion of the absolute truth and the relative truth are considered interdependent and inseparable. So the idea of trumping or transcending the meat puppet idea of the sort of lower idea about what our temporal existence is, and jumping above that into the spiritual enlightenment is not the idea of either Tantric Buddhism or Shambhala. It's the idea that you commingle those realities, and in fact they become inseparable and cohesive. So the idea of becoming a great citizen, a great artist, a great business person is absolutely coherent with being a great spiritual practitioner. Now historically, that is a very rare view, very rare, because we have separation of church and state, or we have autocracy, or we have theocracy. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of how you would put that on earth was exactly the topic that Trungpa Rinpoche was trying to play with before he died, and passed along to us to think about. How would we structure our society to represent a very integrated approach towards your temporal existence and your sense of spirituality? And what would it look like? What would leadership look like? What would government look like? What would the military look like? What would the post office look like? What would art look like? And this is so profound, in my opinion, because for many centuries, the spiritual people, you look around the world now, they've gone to the mountains. They look at the world, including in Tibetan Buddhism, as a kind of, there's a great quote from Tulku Ujin. It's he said, the Buddha took, they call it the red dust world, our everyday reality, And he said, you spit it out. He said, and once you spit it out, you wouldn't pick it up out of the sand and put it back in your mouth. It's like, and if the Buddha didn't teach renunciation, people wouldn't have been monastics and he wouldn't have taught that way. But that is not the iteration that I particularly am following, and many people these days are following, which is this red dust world is the sacred world.
Yeah, that's always been what I've understood as well, is that, there is, in fact, this, like I said, it's the tapestry. It's the wovenness of all of it. The whole catastrophe, the Zorba, the Greek, thing, right?
The whole catastrophe.
Yeah, the whole bag of what.
Are you Greek?
No, I'm Italian, Haitian, and Dominican.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody should put an ice cube in your drink, huh?
Well, listen, I mean, if you just look at the history of those two countries, right?
Yeah.
Dominican Republic and all of that racial stuff and all of the stuff that's cockamamie today when it comes to skin color and ethnicity and background. And then you take the Italian stuff in terms of the immigrant and the hard work. And then a lot of folks who are Italian really are like Columbus, and Columbus was amazing. He discovered America, and you look at indigenous people and stuff. Mm-hmm. So even in me, there is all of that.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm just one little person.
Yes, that's beautiful. That's terrific. Right? Yeah.
And so then how am I showing up in the world and educating myself about blind spots and portals and connections, and how can I be the integration that is actually already in some ways in me, but also has to be made aware of.
Sure.
Through a certain amount of study or history or whatever.
Well, and there's a lot of cultures that are merging. And if you go back to your, not just the DNA, but what was happening to the DNA in terms of temporally, you've got all kinds of governmental situations. You look at Italy, there was a monarchy at one point. It was a fascist country at another point. They obviously have hierarchy, leadership, tremendous artists and so forth. So we're all, have a tremendous background that we're drawing from. I was just reading in Shambhala's Sacred Path of the Warrior, because I'm teaching at Shambhala Center this weekend. And, he's saying our ancestral lineages are really important.
Yeah.
That in cultures where they acknowledge their ancestral lineages, this is a good thing. It's a healthy thing.
And in cultures where they don't, and I'll shift maybe the conversation now a little bit more into what's topical and happening in terms of racism in this country in particular, especially among people of color, what we see and all of that. But there's really an idea that when we understand where we've come from, we can better understand literally like who we are. And so some of the undoing racism work that I've done has invited people to explore their own personal lineages in a way that they maybe haven't, because a lot of folks that have been in the white away classes and things like that I've taken have been more like, I don't really know where I'm come from. I'm Scottish, but I don't really know my history, or I don't really know the history of the commons and what happened to the Europeans that were, wealthy landowners wanted the commons. They pushed us out. We came to this country. We were given certain things, and then we were divided from people of color when we did try to come together, because they recognized that we could be more powerful, and not powerful like lording over, but powerful in the collective. And so tracing that back can help some folks, give them a better sense of, well, I do come from somewhere. I don't just have this white American identity.
Right.
It's not all of who I am.
It's like white bread in a way. I grew up in the 50s, and I remember white bread there was a bread called Wonderbread. You probably are too young to remember this, but
I do remember it.
Really? Okay. Well, Wonderbread.
Yellow and blue polka dotted.
Yes. And the logo was Wonderbread helps build strong bodies 12 ways. 12 ways. And the truth was, Wonderbread helps build strong bodies 0 ways, because they've taken out all the fiber, they've taken out all the nutritional impact, So this is interesting when you contemplate. I mean, it's very beautiful what you're saying, Francesca. It's very potent in a way to just really feel who you are all the way down to the roots of it, and let your practice include that, because the other alternative is people just will assimilate or imitate. Asian tradition or something that appeals to them, and they become disingenuous in a very obvious way. They become Indian-like or Tibetan-like, and also they've never really gone to the root of their own existence as the ground. And they become fascinated maybe with some Indian or Tibetan guru who has kind of great style and presence, But just so you know, my role as a teacher, I don't see it as me becoming charismatic and kind of colorful individual and therefore magnetizing people, and then now they're fascinated with me. I really have a hard line about this, which is it's about the students. That's as a teacher, I say to people, if you want to assess a teacher, look at their students. If the students are good, it's a good teacher.
Yeah, that's beautiful, because it is a personal path. I mean, the whole point of this is, and I was just at your center the other day, Shambhala Center in New York City, listening to Reverend Angel Kyoto.
I heard that was amazing.
It was amazing, and it'll be up on your podcast. I'll advertise for you guys the, what is it, Meditation in the City or Calm in the City or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
On the Shambhala website, you can check it out. They have a podcast, and her talk will be up there.
Yeah.
And she was basically talking about the collective liberation, that nobody's free unless we're free. Like I'm bound unless we're all free, right? And
well, that's pure Mahayana. That is Mahayana.
And that what I guess I'm getting at is that what I don't think a lot of people know, and I've only known this because through another one of my teachers, Jack Kornfield, and the training that I'm in with him and the invitation that he really put on the table for me in particular, and I think for everyone, is to understand what it means to do undoing racism work, or understanding what unconscious bias means in terms of a present day context when it comes to where do we, don't know mind, I don't know, stay curious. How did I get to believe these things that I do? What do I believe? What's my automatic reaction? How do I change the reaction into a response? Where do I create the space? But all of that can't just happen on the cushion. There has to be a certain part that we go back and we do a little bit of education about how did we get here? Who are we as an individual?
Have you had my son Ethan on your podcast yet?
No, but he can be next.
Yeah, because, really, I've tried to keep up with what's going on as the wheel turns. And, he seems to be a voice of a lot of the issues that you're raising, not just him, but the generation that is coming there is more apparent to them that the integration of this kind of system into a kind of politically acute and socially aware type of society and practice is critical. It's not an escape pod for them.
It's not an escape pod for anyone. And I think what I would say, just to again sort of try to consolidate that thread a little bit, is that when I was doing these implicit bias classes or whatever, one of the invitations was to not only study your own personal history or lineage or how do we get here, but also what did it mean to be American? And that included stripping away the Slovakian dress. In my Italian family, that meant you couldn't learn Italian or speak Italian. And so in order to assimilate, then you had to adopt what was the quote unquote Wonderbread philosophy, right? And in order to be American, that's what it meant. And so now we're pivoting and saying, wait, that's not sustainable. That didn't really work. It had a certain amount of benefits for a few for a time at the cost of many others for a long time. And also what Angel Kyoto Williams was saying, and at a cost to ourselves. Right? And so it's beautiful to really just say, listen, nobody's to blame here at this point, but let's do the work of figuring out what it is and then working with our minds and incorporating the educational piece so that we can then see it clearly enough to be able to know what to do wisely instead out of reactivity, but out of a responsiveness.
Now, when you go back to the Wheel of Life and the 6 realms, what's interesting in the archetypes, the 6 archetypes presented in the Wheel of Life as the 6 realms are actually not cultural. They're pan-cultural or trans-cultural. And you could see them as closer to the root of creating the worlds in which we're working through a lot of the issues you're talking about, because they're so fundamental in terms of our ability to experience aversion in its raw form, not just ethnic, not just sexual, not just cultural. What is aversion itself? Why do you go, ugh, I don't want that? Also, the grasping, and also the ignorance. So these three are at the very core of the wheel in their most raw, basic state. They haven't even evolved into the narrative of the kind of situation that we're talking about, societal situation. It's just a raw being having these kind of reactivity at the core of it. That's what generates the realms. So,
100%.
so therefore, if you're looking for pleasure, you end up sort of like up in the sort of lofty realms, or craving, the hungry ghost realms. And these realms, I would say, are transcultural, which is an interesting way of looking at it and joining that with the conversation that we just had. What is the basic psychology of a human being? That's what we're really talking about.
And also, I think when you look at Dan Siegel's work and a lot of these neuroscientists or whatever, they'll talk about the fact that there's a reason why evolutionarily we've always been sort of survivor-based, which ends up translating into fear-based, which ends up into, translating into not well-being based. And so that when we're using positive neuroplasticity practices, or like the meta loving kindness retreat, or the 4 Brahma Viharas, compassion and empathetic joy, and, these other more quote unquote positive qualities that we can plant the seeds of, in addition to, weeding the garden of the, sort of nefarious, growth that's in there or whatever, that we can get to a point where we are able to have a more organic, as Dan Goldman would say, trait-like quality of well-being.
Yeah.
It's just situational, right? That we're growing that, but we're recognizing we're wired for survival evolutionarily. We're not wired necessarily for well-being, but because we're Homo sapiens sapiens, the awareness of the awareness, we can then come in and say, okay, now I get to intentionally chart a different course, mindfully, repetitively, cultivatingly, to continue to move in this other direction.
Well, it's an interesting inquiry to go deep into the wiring and see what are we really wired for, and are we hardwired for anything would be one question, or is it just like whatever, it's just open, or are we wired for survival, as you're saying, which the lower brain is clearly wired for survival. The higher brain is obviously wired for something else, for empathy and for communication. So who we are as a being, is there's so many portals, there's so many access roads for how you would even consider talking about it. But in the wheel of life, and in Buddhism in general, we do tend to start with like addressing immediately, directly, what our experience is. And also the fact that our experience, when we address it immediately, like if you do your sitting meditation, you see, well, my experience has some troubled aspect to it. It has anxiety in the experience. It has stress in it. It has these qualities. If I'm not in a state of denial or spiritual wishful thinking, I can easily acknowledge that I'm like, spend a good portion of my day worrying about stuff that hasn't even happened yet, and beating myself over stuff that already is gone, that already happened. So, where to start is an interesting point with one's own personal journey. And definitely, I'm from the school, start with the discomfort. Mm-hmm. That's where to start. Don't start with your ideals about bliss and emptiness and all those things. Start right at the moment of that you put your butt on the cushion. Right now, are you experiencing any kind of discomfort? And in fact, you said a lot of people can't even sit, and that's the reason. There is no other reason. They're just not comfortable enough with themselves to be with themselves.
But you said something different just now, which I think is critical to sort of, I don't want to say convert, because that's a terrible word to use, but I just said it, is into thinking that it's possible. Because you said your experience of anxiety. You didn't say you anxiety. And so a lot of folks who think that they are only fear and anxiety really have a hard time, I know I did, sitting on a cushion, watching the mind, doing whatever, because I thought I was only that all the time, ever, always, only, as opposed to recognizing this is an experience in my own experience by watching it that is ephemeral. And it may come up more often than not, but in my own experience, it's not. There's something else going on with me that can sort of look at that experience and know that it's experience, and know that it's also maybe unpleasant experience in my case, but also that it doesn't mean that I'm unpleasant.
Well, that was a shift of perspective that got, basically that perspective shift pulled you out or threw you out of the hell realm in terms of the wheel of life. The hell realm is a realm in which you are the misery, you are the anxiety, you're inseparable from it. Therefore, it seems interminable, permanent, without causes and conditions. And the message of the wheel of life and why it's held in the arms of the deity that is a wrathful deity representing impermanence is saying all the experiences within these 6 realms are impermanent, even though they may not feel that way at the time. If you're a hungry ghost, if you're an addict, it doesn't feel temporary. And you feel like, if I don't get that cookie right now, I'm going to die. Right? You feel you're going to die.
And then that's why, again, turning toward the experience and getting curious in terms of an insight practice about, well, what does it really need? What is it trying to tell me? Not getting lost in the story of it, but just getting curious about, okay, so that's there. So yeah, let's figure out maybe what that has to teach me, as opposed to
as you said, with the meta intelligence that you're cultivating, the abstract watcher or the witness is a kind of meta intelligence. It's not invested in the experience, it's looking at the experience. That is the fork in the road where you go, I'm not completely captivated by this experience. Somehow awareness is sort of taking a non-judgmental view of the experience. And that is a huge point of departure. It's not the end of the path. It's sort of, but it is a big transitional moment where you go, the first time you ever see your anger as an experience rather than as identifying completely with it.
And it's so liberating in my experience, because for me, I could let myself recognize that there was anger and that maybe there was an injustice to actually feel as though there was a certain reason why this energy of anger arose. And then there's the space to be able to say, let me take a deep breath. Let me see what I really think is helpful to do about this for me and for others. And then maybe take the time to do it in a way that's skillful or helpful, as opposed to reactionary. So, I mean, I really have to say that all of that wouldn't have happened, back to our earlier point, we only have about 10 minutes left, about this business of when all else fails, we end up here. And I was going to tell you at the very beginning, when you said I had this really funny look on my face at the very beginning, when I was just like, I get it, is because I wouldn't have come to this if I didn't get arrested. I had gotten pulled over. I didn't take a breathalyzer, and I ended up getting in a jail cell overnight with a bunch of other women in the middle of downtown New York. And the next day I woke up and I was like, okay, I need to do stuff that's different. I mean, I'm fine. I don't have a record. I'm grateful. All of the maybe other karmic seeds that I may have planted, if you will, came together to help me navigate through this process, right? But at that moment, in much the same way that your buddy, one of my teachers also, Krishnadas, talks about, when Mr. Shwari came in and was just like, you will not be a drug addict anymore. Yeah, I woke up that day and I was like, well, I'm never drinking again, because this makes no sense. I'm never eating meat again. I'm not going to spend my time or waste my time with people, and especially with men in my case, that weren't really cultivating a sense of well-being for me or with me. And I'm going to try to turn my attention towards something that makes more sense, that I don't really know what it is, but it's going to be an orientation that is hopefully more wholesome for all beings considered. And that only happened once this ish hit the fan. You know what I'm saying? I had gone through many times of bumping my head up against the wall, and then all this other stuff opened up. So when they say, like Leonard Cohen, you're the musician, you're the Grammy winner, that's the crack is where the light gets in. That's where the light got in.
Yeah.
And that was a real huge somatic thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I can go back to this cultivation part. and stay on the path and keep on doing whatever it is that I'm trying to explore, you know. But that was like real life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're like, why did you just say that?
I am?
No, I don't know. Maybe it was a little bit much. Okay, let's move on to the music. Creativity. Talking about Grammy-winning stuff. Talking about, the idea that your next book is about creativity, the creative process, maybe a portal to mindfulness, maybe a way in which that's also a practice for you. Talk about that. I mean, I've enjoyed your guitar playing many times, and it obviously creates a lot of joy in the world for a lot of people. And it also required a lot of cultivation from you to be able to sort of have the music, if you will, move through you as it often does.
Yeah, on a good day, it's all moving through you.
My God, you sound like you're
as a senior citizen.
I was just about to say, you sound like you're describing like X-Lax or something.
Yeah, well, let's leave that to the implied dimension. But, the creativity, the way that I'm talking about it is it's a kind of natural juiciness that people have. And it of course, the expression is going to be different. But, my basic point of view is that it's creative to be alive. Like even, I look at people's hairstyles and their glasses and how they comport themselves and how they decorate their houses and what decisions they make about, walking down the street. And to me, it's an ongoing concert, if you will. The whole thing, reality is like a concert, and people are, it's extremely theatrical and, people are really expressing themselves. So when somebody says, I'm not creative, I go, we're using different language here for two different things. So the essential thing is creative. Now, when you choose a particular channel for your creativity, like you're a journalist, I'm a guitar player, this is, I call this your offering in the book. And the idea is that you're making an offering. And then I go further and say, is your offering also your livelihood, or do you want it to be just kind of part of creative output for your friends and family or whoever?
The make a buck part of the book.
That's right, a hobby as opposed to a livelihood. If it's going to be a livelihood, I've got a lot to say about it. And I actually found myself over the years mentoring people, mostly younger, and saying, let me save you 10 or 20 years here. We'll just work on the mistakes I made. I'll pass them along to you so you don't have to do it. I mean, now, of course, people have to make their own mistakes, having said that. But if it's going to be your livelihood, there's a lot of things to think about. And I just end up working with a lot of people and being with a lot of people who are trying to bring spirituality, their creative juice, and their livelihood together. Like you're a perfect candidate in a way, But everybody that I know kind of is. And you're trying to create an entrepreneurial channel for yourself, which is a very creative thing to do. And then there are certain business principles that are kind of like in music. You don't play, if you're in the key of D major, you don't play an F natural. That's called a minor third. You got to understand that principle. Like an idiot, a new person who can't really play the guitar is going to play that and think they're in, but anybody who knows anything about music is going, no, that's the wrong note. So that there are principles underlying all of these things. The fundamental urge is just to express and to communicate. That's I think we all have that in us. We all want to be heard. We want to be seen. We want to feel, I just think that's human. And there's no spiritual trip that I'm aware of that goes, well, you can't be human. That's, you have to transcend that. So the idea of expressing yourself, when I'm playing guitar, I feel, because I've practiced and I've trained in it, I can express myself fairly freely with it. And then it's a question of who am I playing with at that point and who am I playing for? And then if I add the livelihood piece, it's a whole nother conversation. We'll leave it out for this time. But yeah, just, I think two things that come up really are discipline and freedom and the relationship between those two things. And I think that's what people got to contemplate. If you feel like you experience a lot of freedom with your creativity, but you're undisciplined, that's not going to be complete. And if you're just disciplined, but you're not enjoying yourself, that's so bringing those two things of discipline and freedom together is kind of a through line.
And I think that's beautiful because it's sort of life, right? I mean, what they say is what you turn your attention to is what grows. So that's the discipline part. And then sort of, also if you're there and you're missing the miracle because you're only paying attention to whatever is the thing, like your cell phone, then you're going to
missing the miracle. Who said that? That's a cute phrase.
That's me.
Oh, that's a good title.
Yeah. Don't miss the miracle.
Are you missing the miracle?
Are you missing the miracle? Well, you can be my agent on that then. That'll be my next book. I'm copywriting it in my...
I'll just be your nudge. I'll tell you to write that book. Are you missing the miracle? That's a really good title. It's very compelling.
Well, and I was missing the miracle until that incident a few years ago.
Now we're in the intro.
I really was, but I was so stuck under the clouds of gray that, and trauma happened and stuff happened and there was real stuff that was not kosher. But that idea that you're talking about is the discipline and the creativity. The discerning part you can know and you can be joyful. That's also possible.
Yeah, discipline and freedom.
Discipline and freedom. But what is freedom really? The internal freedom, right? Well,
this is why, I think for whatever reason, we're not trained in opposites, or which is really a Taoist or a tantric view, is that we don't say it's all one in Buddhist Tantra. We say it's not one and not two.
Right.
That's a much different statement in a way, because you're saying, by saying that, you're saying it is all one and it's also diverse. It's both. And if you fasten too hard to the it's all one, then that's called theism, which is considered a kind of a misapprehension of reality. And if you work too hard on denying that interconnectedness, that's called nihilism. And that's the other belief system that will keep you, apart from accurate perception. So this is yin and yang, this whole idea in Asian thought and Taoist thought in particular, that these two opposites intermingle, masculine and feminine. They're not separate. They're intermingling and they're transforming. There's a beautiful, when you see the yin yang symbol, it's like, it's really two fish swimming in opposite directions. It has that connotation, and a dot one is black and one is white, and there's a dot of white in the black one and a dot of black in the white one. But the real image, if you want to imagine that symbol accurately, is that it's in 4 dimensions. You have to see it in 4 dimensions, which is that it is 3-dimensional. You have to see it as a ball, a sphere, not a flat circle. So it's multi-dimensional that way. And it's moving in time. If you could see it moving in time, the yin is transforming into yang and the yang is transforming into yin. So by the time that gets into the next moment, they're completely reversed.
Right, causality. Yeah.
Yeah. So understanding how to hold opposites in a dynamic union rather than a static union, which is sometimes the all one philosophy can put you into a static union. You go like, I've merged. You never have merged. You are merging. It's a dynamic process. And that's what coupling is. That's what playing with people is. You never get to the, okay, it's a dynamic bringing together of two things. So that's the way I see things anyhow. That's my view.
No, it's beautiful. And I mean, that's 100% a gorgeous way to kind of close out the sphere, if you will, of the conversation that we've been having. Just because in my experience, I think, Joseph Goldstein, when I was talking to him the other day, was like, yeah, it's not that you're the knower, that witness consciousness that we were talking about earlier. It's that there is the knowing.
Yeah.
ING. And that, it's sort of this idea, I always call it's all the verb, never the noun, or not never, because that sounds very whatever, but it's the verbing.
I hope you're writing some of the stuff down for your book. These are chapter titles. ING could be a chapter title.
Well, okay.
Are you missing the miracle?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
The relationship noun and verb. Come on, you have to write it. What are you waiting for?
Because I'm too busy talking to you because I like chatting too much.
Well, just chat to yourself and write it down. That's all. That's what writing is.
You're right about that, actually. And I think I've been a little bit, talk about cultivation. I wanted to be able to get to a place where I felt like I owned it enough, not own it like a way of,
I get it.
but an integrated way of like, yeah, I get this. And we just keep on going back on the treadmill because we don't want to get fat. But, like.
But here's the thing. It's a cooking show that you're doing, but you're also the muffin.
Yeah. Right.
You're the eggplant parmesan yourself. So in other words, your journey, I think it's very helpful to remember that many of the great teachers that we study with were not born that way. They went on a journey, and particularly Buddha is a journeying kind of thing. And so as you share your journey with a very open heart, the way you do, then many, many people can resonate with it because they're on a similar journey. If it's a cooking show, you only show the final product, then that's not as interesting.
Well, you missed it on Saturday because I brought cookies on Saturday, that I had baked. But I'll have to send you some in gratitude for today. David Nichtern, author of Awakening from the Daydream, Reimagining the Buddha's Wheel of Life, and of the forthcoming, what is it?
Well, we won't talk about it too much, but it's Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck. And it'll be out fall of 2019.
David, I am so grateful that we had a chance to chat today. It's great to see you again. And we didn't get into everything, but how could we in an hour? But we will hopefully revisit this at another time. I'd love to have you back on.
Thank you, Francesca. And good luck with your book.
Thanks.
And your podcast as a kind of warm up for it.
Well, I appreciate the good wishes, and I will allow them to nourish me when I try to get my seat, not only in the cushion, but in the chair in front of the laptop.
Yeah. Get your dream catcher out and swing it around.
Sounds good to me. Bye, sweetie.
Okay. All right. See you.